There are few figures in Arthurian legend as mysterious as the Lady of the Lake. She appears in fleeting moments, wrapped in mist and magic, giving kings their swords, shaping the fates of knights, and disappearing just as quickly as she came. Some believe there was only one lady watching over Arthur's reign from the water's edge, while others claim there were many, each holding their own piece of the legend. The most common names tied to her are Nimue and Viviane, though who they truly were depends on which story you hear. For the sake of simplicity, we'll call her Viviane. She is often remembered for a single act, placing Excalibur into Arthur's hands. But her role in the legend is much deeper than that. She was a guardian of magic, a teacher of great sorcerers, and a force that operated outside the world of men. Some saw her as an ally, others as a dangerous manipulator. But one thing is certain: without her, Arthur's story would not have unfolded the way it did. She raised the greatest knight of Camelot. She sealed away the most powerful sorcerer of the age. She stood at the threshold of two worlds, where the lines between power and destiny blurred. And when the dream of Camelot came to an end, she was there, waiting, ready to reclaim what was always meant to return to her. This is the story of Viviane, the Lady of the Lake, from Arthurian mythology. No one knows exactly where Viviane came from. Some say she was born of the Fae, a child of the otherworld raised in the shimmering depths of an enchanted lake, untouched by time. Others claim she was once human, a mortal woman who walked the forests of Brittany, only to be forever changed by the touch of magic. And then there are those who whisper that she was never born at all, that she simply always was, existing outside of time, watching as empires rose and fell, waiting for the moment when she would shape the destiny of men. What is known is this: Viviane did not live among mortals. She resided in a mystical lake, hidden from human eyes, a place where the waters never stilled and the mist never lifted. This was no ordinary lake. It was a threshold, a gateway between the world of men and something far older, a realm where the old ways had not yet faded and where magic still thrived. Some who entered never returned. Others emerged changed, gifted or cursed by the touch of its waters. Only a handful ever saw Viviane herself, and fewer still understood what she truly was. She was no mere spirit, nor just a sorceress. She was the Lady of the Lake, keeper of enchantments, guardian of things not meant for mortal hands. Though her presence was rarely seen, her influence was undeniable. Some believed she was a goddess, watching over the balance of magic and power in the mortal world. Others feared her, speaking of her in hushed tones as a being who could shape fate itself. But long before that, long before Camelot's rise, long before kings and knights fought for power, Viviane remained in her lake, watching the world unfold. Her role was not yet written, but the forces that would shape the legend of Arthur were already moving. And when the time was right, she would step out of the mist and into history. Her story had only just begun. Viviane's presence was as much a mystery as her power. Few ever saw her, and those who did spoke of a woman who seemed untouched by time. Most described her with long, flowing dark hair, either brunette or black, with a beautiful face both serene and unreadable. Her eyes were said to be piercing, shifting between deep blue and silver, carrying the weight of someone who had seen centuries pass her by. Her skin was pale, sometimes almost luminous, as if she belonged more to the reflection of the lake than to the world of men. She wore robes that shimmered like liquid silver, moving with the mist, as though she was part of it. Some legends, however, paint her differently, depicting her with golden hair like sunlight on water, or auburn locks hinting at a fae-like origin. Yet, no matter how she was described, one truth remained. She was otherworldly, a being who did not belong to the world of mortals, but shaped it all the same. Viviane was not like other sorceresses. She was not wild like Morgana, nor bound to the courts of men like the druids of old. She did not crave power for the sake of ruling, nor did she use magic to shape the destinies of others for her own amusement. Her power was ancient, patient, and deliberate. Unlike Merlin, who moved among mortals, advising kings and steering the course of history, Viviane remained apart, watching from the waters of her hidden lake, stepping into the world of men only when it was necessary. She was both feared and revered, not because she wielded raw, destructive magic, but because she understood the deeper currents of fate. Viviane did not cast spells carelessly, nor did she seek recognition for the role she played. When she acted, it was with precision. When she spoke, her words carried weight. Her magic was not for show. It was a force, a tool, a means to shape the world as she saw fit. But to understand Viviane's influence, one must first understand who she was beneath the veil of mystery. Viviane was an enigma, a woman whose intentions were rarely clear, even to those she aided. She did not offer explanations, nor did she waste words on things she considered trivial. When she spoke, it was with purpose, her voice smooth and calm, unshaken by the concerns that troubled lesser beings. To some, she seemed emotionless, detached, distant, as though she existed in a world separate from the one they knew. But beneath her cool exterior was something far more complex. She was not heartless, nor was she cruel. She had seen the rise and fall of men, the greed that corrupted them, the way power twisted even the most noble souls. Because of this, she was cautious. She did not trust easily. Those who sought her aid had to prove themselves worthy, and those who betrayed her rarely got a second chance. Viviane could be kind, but her kindness was never without reason. She could be merciless, but only when the situation demanded it. She understood that balance was fragile, and that to preserve it, she sometimes had to make decisions that others would not understand. She was not one to let emotions cloud her judgment, yet there were moments when even she could not escape the weight of her own choices. Her patience was her greatest weapon, while others acted impulsively, drawn by the urgency of their desires. Viviane waited. She knew that time itself was a force beyond magic, one that could not be controlled, but it could be outlasted. Viviane was more than just a sorceress. She was a guardian, a keeper of things too powerful for the hands of men. Though her existence often seemed passive, she held responsibilities that shaped the very foundation of Arthurian legend. Excalibur, the sword that would define King Arthur, a weapon forged not for destruction, but for destiny itself, was entrusted to her. It was she who decided when and to whom it would be given. And when the time came, it would be she who took it back. The lake where she resided was no mere body of water. It was a threshold between the mortal world and something much older. She ensured that the knowledge and power hidden there did not fall into the wrong hands. Though she did not rule over men, Viviane influenced their world in ways few could comprehend. She granted gifts, set trials, and determined who was worthy of wielding magic. Those who sought power without wisdom often found themselves on the wrong side of her will. She did not act as a queen or a ruler, nor did she sit on a throne, commanding armies. Yet her influence was greater than any king's, for she dealt not in laws and conquests, but in the unseen forces that guided the world itself. Viviane's magic was unlike that of other sorcerers. It did not rely on books or incantations, nor was it bound by the limitations of mortal understanding. Her power was woven into the very fabric of nature, an extension of the unseen forces that governed the world. Viviane could disappear in an instant, rendering herself invisible to those she did not wish to be seen by. She could alter her appearance, shifting between forms so seamlessly that even the most perceptive eyes could not detect the change. Some claimed she could take the form of a swan, a silver fish, even the mist itself. She moved as effortlessly through water as she did through air, untethered to any single shape. The lake was not just her home, it was an extension of her will. She could still its surface, summon great storms, or open its depths like a door, revealing hidden realms that few ever saw. Unlike crude magic that relied on force, Viviane's spells were precise, subtle, and permanent. She could bind even the most powerful sorcerers, as she would one day prove with Merlin himself. Whether through foresight or deep understanding, Viviane saw what others could not. She knew when to act, when to wait, and when to disappear entirely. Some claimed she could see the future, though she rarely spoke of what was to come. But her greatest power, the one that truly set her apart, was her ability to remain untouched by time. She was not immortal in the sense that she could not die, but she existed beyond the reach of age and decay. While kings fought and empires crumbled, Viviane remained, watching, waiting, knowing that the world would always turn back to magic in the end. She was not a queen, she was not a warrior, she was something else entirely. Arthur's kingdom was still young when Viviane emerged from the mists to meet him. He was a king, but not yet a legend. He had won his throne by pulling a sword from a stone, but that blade, Caliburn, had already shattered in battle. His claim to the throne was divine, yet the world did not yet believe in him. His enemies still saw him as a boy playing at kingship, and even his own knights questioned whether he was strong enough to hold Britain together. Viviane had been watching. She had always known Arthur would rise, but she also knew that no mortal king could rule without something greater than himself. A symbol, a relic, something that could not be questioned. He needed a blade that would not break, a weapon forged beyond mortal hands, one that carried with it the weight of kingship and the authority of magic itself. And so she chose to act. Arthur and his knights had ridden deep into the wilds in pursuit of an enemy when the mists thickened around them. The air grew unnaturally still. Even the horses, battle-trained and fearless, hesitated as if an unseen force was watching them. The trees loomed higher, their twisted roots stretching over the earth like grasping hands, and the path before them seemed to fade, swallowed by the mist. The knights, some of the bravest warriors in all of Britain, found themselves unnerved, shifting uneasily in their saddles. Then, without warning, the land ended. Before them stretched a lake that had not been there moments before. Vast, endless, impossibly deep. Its surface was smooth as polished glass, untouched by wind or ripple. The air smelled of rain, though no storm had passed, and a strange silence pressed down upon them, thick and absolute. And then at the center of the lake, standing upon the water as though it were solid earth, was Viviane. Arthur had never seen a woman like her. She was tall, slender, her presence both commanding and serene. Her skin was pale, kissed by neither sun nor age, her long dark hair flowing as if caught in an unseen current. Her robes shimmered like liquid silver, shifting in ways that defied the light, and her eyes, deep, knowing, ageless, fixed upon Arthur with quiet expectation. The knights murmured among themselves, hands moving to the hilts of their swords, but Arthur raised a hand, silencing them. He did not know who she was, not yet, but he recognized power when he saw it. This was no ordinary woman, no trickster or spirit meant to lure men to their doom. She radiated something greater, something beyond mortal comprehension. And then the water stirred. From beneath the surface, a hand emerged, not hers, but another, clad in shimmering armor that glowed like polished silver. It rose slowly, deliberately, gripping the hilt of a sword that no mortal craftsman could have forged. Excalibur. It was unlike any weapon Arthur had ever seen. The blade gleamed as though it had been carved from moonlight itself, its edge so fine that it seemed to cut the very air around it. Symbols, ancient, unreadable, ran along its length, whispering of power beyond human understanding. The hilt was wrapped in darkened leather, the pommel heavy with a jewel that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was not merely a sword. It was a king's blade. He stepped forward, wading into the water, though his knights called after him in alarm. But the lake did not take him. The moment his hand wrapped around the hilt of Excalibur, something changed. The air hummed. The water around him rippled outward in a perfect circle. And in that instant, Arthur understood. This was no ordinary sword, no simple weapon to be wielded. It carried a weight beyond steel and war. It was power, duty, sacrifice. He lifted the blade from the water, its light reflecting in his eyes. The boy who had once pulled a sword from a stone was gone. In his place stood a king. Viviane watched him for a long moment, then turned and stepped back into the mist. She had done what she had come to do. The world would remember that Arthur had received Excalibur, but few would remember the one who had given it to him. That was how it had to be. She did not seek credit, nor did she desire gratitude. Her role was never to stand in the light of men's legends. But Excalibur came with a price. It was not a gift freely given. One day, when Arthur's reign was at its end, it would be Viviane who ensured that the blade was returned to the lake from whence it came. For nothing, not even a king, could hold on to power forever. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The night the kingdom of Benwick burned, Viviane watched from the misted waters of her enchanted lake. She had foreseen this. The fall of King Ban, the desperate cries of his wife, Lady Elaine, and the child left fatherless. These were the tides of fate, moving as they always had. But the future was never set in stone. And so, as the flames devoured castle walls, as soldiers looted what remained, Viviane emerged from the lake's edge and took the child into her arms. Lancelot never knew the world of men as a child. He did not grow up among squires or play at the feet of kings. Instead, he was raised in the lake realm, a place hidden beyond mortal sight, where time did not pass as it did in the world above. It was a realm of endless twilight, where the air shimmered with enchantment and the stars reflected in waters that stretched beyond the horizon. Here, knights did not battle for land or glory, but were shaped for something greater. Here, magic still lingered, untouched by war or the failings of men. Viviane did not raise him as a mother would. She was not gentle, nor was she overly affectionate, but she was deliberate. Every lesson, every moment of his childhood was guided by purpose. She molded him into something beyond an ordinary knight, something stronger, faster, more disciplined. He was not just taught the art of war, but of restraint, of patience, of the weight that power carried. From the moment he could walk, he was trained. His body was shaped for battle. He learned to wield a sword before he could properly speak, taught to strike with precision and speed, to parry with an instinct that became second nature. He sparred against illusions, against magic that forced him to think beyond brute strength. He learned to move with silence, to read the language of the wind, to understand that combat was not just about force, but about control. His mind was shaped for chivalry. Viviane ensured that he learned more than just war. She taught him the ways of courtly manners, of diplomacy, of the delicate balance between power and mercy. He was educated in poetry and music, in the subtle art of words that could cut deeper than steel. He learned to bow as easily as he learned to fight, to understand that a knight's duty was not just to serve, but to lead. But there was one lesson Viviane never taught him: love. She had seen what love could do to great men. She had watched kings fall, warriors break, empires crumble over something as fragile as devotion. So, she kept Lancelot apart from it. She sheltered him in the lake realm, away from the entanglements of the mortal world, believing that as long as his heart remained untested, he would remain unshaken. But fate is cruel, and even the greatest enchantress cannot control everything. The day came when Lancelot had grown too skilled, too strong, too restless for the lake realm. He was no longer a child. He had become a man, his body lean and hardened from years of training, his sharp features carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had never known failure. His hair was dark as midnight, his eyes a piercing blue that held the stillness of deep waters. He had become the perfect knight, not just a warrior but a legend waiting to be written. And so Viviane sent him out into the world. It was not a farewell in the way mortals understood. She did not embrace him, nor did she speak words of sentiment. She simply told him it was time. Time to leave the lake. Time to fulfill the destiny she had prepared him for. With little more than his armor and his sword, Lancelot stepped into the mortal world. He rode toward Camelot, toward Arthur, toward the legend he was meant to become. Viviane watched him go, silent as the lake behind her. She had done her part. She had shaped him into something greater than any knight before him. She had given Camelot its champion, its greatest warrior, its truest defender. But there was one thing she had failed to see. Love, the very thing she had tried to shield him from, would be the one thing that would destroy him. Merlin had always known that magic could not be trusted in the hands of men. He had watched kings try to wield it, only to be consumed by their own greed. He had seen sorcerers driven mad by the power they could not control. He had spent his life balancing the two worlds, magic and mortality, keeping one from destroying the other. And then he met Viviane. She was unlike any other being he had ever encountered. She was not a queen, nor a mere enchantress, nor a mortal woman playing at sorcery. She was something more, something beyond time, beyond law, beyond the limitations of human ambition. He recognized her power immediately, just as she recognized his. Their first meeting was not one of teacher and student, nor of rivals testing their strength. It was a silent understanding, a meeting of equals. But even the greatest magician in the world made mistakes, and his mistake was loving her. At first, it was he who taught her. Merlin, the wise, the ageless, the prophet who had seen too much. He guided her through the deeper mysteries of magic, teaching her spells that even the greatest druids had long since forgotten. He showed her how to read the stars, how to speak to the earth itself, how to bend time without breaking it. But Viviane was no ordinary student. She learned too quickly, absorbed too much. She did not just practice magic, she understood it, as if it had always been a part of her. Her power was not drawn from books or whispered incantations, but from something older, something woven into the waters of her lake and the air that surrounded her. And then the balance shifted. Somewhere along the way, Merlin stopped being her teacher, and Viviane started being his. She led him into the deepest parts of the forest, where the air was thick with magic. She showed him enchantments even he had never dared to practice, spells that did not simply shape reality, but rewrote it. She did not fear magic the way men did. She did not seek to control it. She let it flow through her, as natural as breath. And Merlin, for all his wisdom, was helpless against it. He had always prided himself on being above human weakness. He had never fallen to the temptations of power, never let himself be ruled by emotion. But Viviane was not like the others. He did not just admire her, he longed for her. She was untouchable, elusive, a force beyond his grasp. She never gave him the affection he craved, never returned his love in the way he wished. And yet, she kept him close, letting him believe that perhaps one day she might. And that was when she made her move. Viviane knew what she was doing. She had studied Merlin as carefully as she had studied magic itself. She had watched the way his desire for her clouded his judgment, the way he lingered when she spoke, the way he gave her everything she asked for, hoping it would bring him closer to something she never truly offered. So she asked for one final lesson, one spell, a spell so powerful, so perfect that it could bind even the greatest sorcerer in history. Merlin hesitated, but in the end he gave her what she wanted. And then, before he could realize what had happened, she turned his own magic against him. The air shifted, the ground trembled, the forest seemed to close in around them. Merlin tried to move, to speak, to cast a counterspell, but it was already too late. He was trapped. Some say she sealed him inside a tree, his body frozen within the ancient bark, his voice whispering through the leaves. Others say she cast him into a cave, where the walls themselves became his prison. Some even claim she did not trap him in a place, but in time itself, locking him in an endless dream from which he would never wake. Regardless of how, Merlin was gone. But why did she do it? Some say Viviane had always planned this, that she had used him from the start, learning his secrets before casting him aside. Others claim she did it to protect herself, knowing that as long as Merlin lived, he would never stop chasing her. never stop longing for something she would never give. And then, there are those who believe it was something else entirely. That Viviane did not trap Merlin out of hatred, or fear, or even ambition. That she did it because she saw what he could become. Magic had changed him. He had lived too long, seen too much. He had begun to lose himself in the power he wielded, and in his longing for Viviane, he had started to forget the difference between wisdom and desire. Perhaps Viviane saw the path he was on, and knew that if she did not stop him, no one would. Perhaps she did not destroy him. Perhaps she saved him from himself. With Merlin gone, everything changed. Arthur lost his greatest advisor, Camelot lost its guiding hand, and magic, once carefully balanced between the mortal world and the realm of enchantment, became unstable. Viviane did not return to the lake immediately. She remained in the shadows, watching the world she had just reshaped. Perhaps she wondered if she had done the right thing. Perhaps she knew, deep down, that Merlin's absence would have consequences even she could not predict. Or perhaps, as always, she had simply done what needed to be done. Not every knight who met Viviane came seeking wisdom. Some came with steel. Her arrival at Camelot that day was not one of peace or favor. She had come to claim a debt. Arthur had taken Excalibur from her hands, and in return, he had sworn to grant her a boon when the time came. Now she had come to collect, but what she asked for was not treasure, not land, nor power. It was a life. Who she sought depends on the version of the tale. Some say she demanded the head of a knight, believing that a wrong had yet to be righted. Others claim she sought vengeance for a blood feud long buried in the past. The most common version states that she demanded the life of Sir Balin, believing him cursed, a man doomed to bring ruin wherever he walked. Arthur hesitated. He owed Viviane much, but to execute one of his own knights without cause would be an act of cruelty, a stain upon his rule. He tried to reason with her, to offer her another gift in return, but she was firm. A promise had been made. A life was owed. Balin did not wait for Arthur's decision. He had never trusted sorcery, never believed in the benevolence of enchantresses. To him, Viviane was not an ally of Camelot, but a manipulator, one who lurked in the shadows, pulling at the threads of fate with no regard for the mortals ensnared in her schemes. Some say she had once wronged his family, though the details are lost to time. Others say he simply saw her for what he believed her to be, a deceiver, a woman whose magic could only bring harm. His hand went to his sword. Viviane did not flinch. She had seen many men like Balin before, warriors who believed strength alone could shape the world, who saw magic as something unnatural, something to be feared and destroyed. Perhaps she had foreseen what would happen. Perhaps she had known the moment she stepped into Camelot that she would not leave alive. But if so, she gave no sign. Arthur had barely risen from his throne to speak before Balin acted. With a sudden violent motion, he drew his sword and struck. Viviane was not defenseless. She was a sorceress of immense power, a woman who had bent the elements to her will, who had ensnared Merlin himself in her magic. But Balin's attack came without warning, and before a single spell could be cast, his blade had already found its mark. The court erupted into chaos. The knights around Arthur shouted in horror, some drawing their own weapons, others frozen in disbelief. The Lady of the Lake staggered back, her hands clutching the deep wound in her chest, her silver robes blooming with red. She had not screamed. She had not pleaded. She had only looked at Balin, as if measuring him, as if already seeing the fate that awaited him. And then, without a word, she fell. Arthur's fury was immediate. He descended the steps of his throne, his voice a storm of rage as he demanded an explanation. Balin, still gripping his sword, did not flinch. He had no regrets, no apologies. He had seen a threat, and he had removed it. The court was divided. Some knights whispered that Balin had been right, that the Lady of the Lake had meddled in the affairs of men one too many times. Others called it a crime, a senseless act of violence against a woman who had gifted their king his most legendary weapon. But no matter what side they took, one truth remained. Viviane was dead. and magic had lost one of its greatest protectors. Balin was banished from Camelot that day, though Arthur could not bring himself to order his execution. Whether it was because of Balin's past service, or because Arthur knew that the knight was already doomed, none could say. For the blade that had slain Viviane was cursed, though Balin did not yet know it. That same sword would soon bring his greatest tragedy, leading him to an end as senseless and violent as the act he had just committed. Through a cruel twist of fate, he would one day cross swords with his own brother, neither recognizing the other until it was too late. And when the final blow was struck, when the blood was spilled, Balin would finally understand the price of his rage. As for Viviane, her body was carried away, though none could say where she was laid to rest. Some believe she returned to the lake from which she had come, her spirit dissolving into the waters that had once been her home. Others claim that her death was only an illusion, that she had merely vanished from the mortal world, retreating to the realm of magic where she could no longer be touched by the violence of men. But whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Camelot had lost something that day. The Lady of the Lake was gone, at least for now. Viviane had given Arthur his sword, and when his time came, she would take it back. The dream of Camelot had been dying for years. The betrayal of Lancelot and Guinevere had shattered the brotherhood of the Round Table. The Holy Grail had sent the best of Arthur's knights on a quest that left many dead or lost to the world. The war with Lancelot had weakened the kingdom, draining its strength just as Arthur needed it most. And then came Mordred. The battle at Camlan was not a clash of armies, not a war of conquest. It was a massacre, a desperate struggle between a king and the son he had tried to deny. Arthur had once believed that his kingdom was built to last, that Camelot would stand for generations. But as he stood amid the ruins of his army, watching his knights fall one by one, he knew the truth. Everything he had built was crumbling. The clash between Arthur and Mordred was the final stroke. Arthur, weary but unyielding, drove Excalibur through Mordred's chest, ending the usurper's life. But in his last act of defiance, Mordred struck back, burying his blade in Arthur's body. The wound was mortal. The king knew it even as he stood, blood spilling onto the battlefield, the wind carrying the cries of the dying into the sky. His knights, what little remained of them, rushed to his side. Sir Bedivere was among them, the last of the loyal, the last of those who had stood by Arthur from the beginning. Arthur could feel the weight of Excalibur in his hands. It had been with him from the start, a blade that had won him battles, that had carved his legend into the world. But it was not his to keep. It had never been. And so, with the last of his strength, he turned to Bedivere. "Take Excalibur," he commanded, "and return it to the lake." Bedivere hesitated. How could he simply throw away the sword of kings? He had seen it cleave through armor, had watched as it shone with an almost divine light. To let it go felt like letting Arthur himself slip away. So he disobeyed. Twice Bedivere lied to Arthur, telling him he threw the sword into the lake, and both times Arthur saw right through him. "You would keep Excalibur for yourself," Arthur murmured. "But it is not yours to keep, nor is it mine. Do as I say, Bedivere. One last time." At last Bedivere obeyed. With the sword in his grasp, he walked once more to the edge of the lake, and then, with all his strength, he hurled it into the lake. The blade spun, silver catching the dying light before it struck the surface, but instead of sinking, it was caught. A hand, pale, slender, and clad in shimmering silver, rose from the water, fingers closing around the hilt with the grace of something beyond mortal understanding. For a moment, Bedivere simply stared. Then, as if the lake itself had taken a breath, the hand and the sword slipped beneath the surface, vanishing without a sound. The waters stilled once more. Bedivere returned to Arthur, telling him what he had seen, and with that the king gave a final, tired smile. The knights carried Arthur's body to the shore where a black boat awaited. Shrouded in mist, figures stood upon the deck, women cloaked in flowing robes, their faces hidden, their presence otherworldly. Some say they were the queens of Avalon, come to take Arthur to his final rest. Others claim that among them, standing in silence as the last breath of Camelot faded into history, was Viviane. She had given Arthur his sword, and now she had taken it back. The dream of Camelot had ended, and the Lady of the Lake faded into myth. With Excalibur returned to the lake and Arthur carried away to Avalon, Viviane's role in the world of men had ended. She had shaped kings and knights, given and taken away power, and watched as the dream of Camelot rose and fell like the tide. But what became of her after that final act remains a mystery. Some say she returned to her lake, slipping beneath the water as silently as she had emerged all those years ago. They believe she still dwells in that hidden realm, watching from afar, waiting for the day when Arthur will rise again, when the world will need its once and future king. They say she still holds Excalibur in her grasp, guarding it until the time is right. Others claim she faded from the world entirely, that without Arthur, without Merlin, without Camelot, there was nothing left for her. The age of magic was ending, and so she too vanished into the mist, leaving behind only whispers and legends. And yet, on certain mornings when the mist rolls thick over still waters, when the wind is heavy with silence, there are those who swear they have seen her. A figure standing in the center of a lake, her robes shifting like silver waves, her gaze set upon something beyond time itself. They say she lingers there, waiting, watching, holding onto a blade that has not yet been forgotten. Because one day Arthur will return, and when he does, Viviane will be there.